Thursday, September 12. Who are you? Read Mark chapter 14, verses 60 to 72. Compare how Jesus responded to events in contrast to how Peter did. What lessons can we learn from the differences? Mark 14, beginning at verse 60. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his clothes. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he asked. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, "Prophesy!" And the guards took him and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. "You also were with that Nazarene Jesus," she said. But he denied it. "I don't know or understand what you're talking about," he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, "This fellow is one of them." Again he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." He began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know this man you're talking about." Immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. Mark 14, verses 53 to 59, describes Jesus being brought to the Sanhedrin in the first part of the trial. It is an exercise in frustration. Let's read that part of the story too. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood and gave this false testimony against him. "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another not made with hands.'" Yet even then their testimony did not agree. Again and again the leaders tried to make their accusation against Jesus stick. The Gospel writer notes how the testimony was false and the witnesses never agreed. Finally, the high priest arises and addresses Jesus directly. At first, Jesus does not respond, but then the high priest places him under oath before God. And we read about that in Matthew 26:63. But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And asks the direct question if he is the Messiah. Jesus frankly and openly admits that he is, and then references Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14, regarding the Son of Man as seated at God's right hand and coming with the clouds of heaven. This is too much for the high priest. Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14 read, In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. This is too much for the high priest, who tears his robes and calls for Jesus' condemnation, which the council immediately gives. The leaders begin to shame Jesus by spitting on him, covering his face, beating him, and calling on him to prophesy. While Jesus is inside, being tried and given a faithful testimony, Peter is outside giving a lying report. This is the sixth and final sandwich story in Mark, and here the irony is particularly pointed. Here are two parallel characters, Jesus and Peter, doing opposite actions. Jesus gives a faithful testimony, Peter a false one. 3 times Peter is accosted by a servant or bystanders, and each time he denies association with Jesus, even cursing and swearing in the process. It is at this point that a rooster crows a second time, and Peter suddenly remembers Jesus' prophecy that he would deny his Lord 3 times that very night. He breaks down and weeps. Here is the striking irony. At the end of his trial, Jesus is blindfolded and struck and commanded to prophesy. The idea was to mock him, since he could not see who struck him. However, at the very time they do this, Peter is denying Jesus in the courtyard below, fulfilling one of Jesus' prophecies. Consequently, in denying Jesus, Peter demonstrates that Jesus is the Messiah. And so to finish the day, what words of hope would you give to someone who, though wanting to follow Jesus, fails at times to do so? Who of us has not, at times, failed to follow what we know Jesus wants? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.